I've always been the kind of person who likes to keep a low profile. I'm not a big fan of oversharing, and to be honest, Facebook was just another app I used to keep in touch with old friends and family. Nothing more, nothing less. I wasn't one of those people who posted every single detail of their life online. In fact, I was the opposite. I'd throw up a vacation pic once in a while or maybe a snapshot from a random night out, but that was about it. Harmless stuff. Or so I thought. This all happened last year. I was still living in Chicago at the time, in a pretty decent neighborhood on the north side. I had a regular 9-to-5 job downtown, nothing too exciting, but it paid the bills. I used Facebook mostly to keep up with my parents, who live out in Seattle, and some old friends I hadn't seen in years. Like most people, I had an account that I'd been using for years, since college. So there were a lot of old posts, photos, and random things I hadn't thought twice about in a long time. It all started one evening when I was sitting at home after work. I was scrolling through my phone, mindlessly flipping between apps, when I got a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture was just a generic image, like one of those stock photos of a sunset. It wasn't uncommon for me to get random friend requests or messages from people I didn't know, so I didn't think much of it. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. The message simply said, "I have something you're going to want to see." Weird, right? But not totally out of the ordinary. People send strange messages online all the time. I figured it was spam or maybe someone trying to scam me. I debated whether to open the link attached to the message, but eventually I caved. Looking back, that was my first mistake. The link led me to a video hosted on some shady-looking website I'd never heard of before. I hesitated, but decided to watch it anyway, thinking it was probably some stupid prank or clickbait. As the video began to play, I immediately felt sick to my stomach. It was me, or at least it looked like me. In the video, I was sitting in some dingy room, clearly engaging in some sort of illegal activity. I couldn't tell where the video was shot, but it looked bad. Really bad. I was doing something I would never do in real life. Something that could ruin my life if it got out. At first, I thought it was a deep fake, a very convincing one. But there was something off about it. It wasn't just that it looked like me. It was that the person in the video was wearing clothes I actually owned, and the setting looked familiar too, though I couldn't quite place it. It freaked me out. I felt like I was looking at an alternate version of myself, like a twisted reflection in a funhouse mirror. But it wasn't me. I knew it wasn't me. I had never done anything like what I saw in that video. My mind started racing. Who made this? Why? What did they want from me? I started thinking about every single photo, every post I'd ever put on Facebook. Over the years, I had uploaded hundreds of pictures, status updates, and little snippets of my life. There were photos from vacations, work parties, nights out with friends, and even random selfies. I had always thought that sharing a few harmless photos couldn't hurt anyone. That my life wasn't interesting enough for anyone to care. Clearly, I was wrong. I clicked back to the message and read the rest of it. The person who sent it said that unless I paid them $5,000, they would release the video to my family, my friends, my co-workers, everyone. I couldn't believe what I was reading. They had even attached a list of names, people who were in my Facebook contacts, including my parents, my boss, and a few close friends. My heart started pounding. What the hell was I supposed to do? I didn't have that kind of money lying around. And even if I did, how could I be sure this person wouldn't just ask for more after I paid them? I felt trapped, completely helpless. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself over and over that the video wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the more I thought about it, the less sure I became. Deepfakes had become disturbingly realistic over the last few years. And even though I knew it wasn't me in that video, would other people believe me if they saw it? Or would they assume the worst, that I had some dark secret life I was hiding? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the photos I'd posted over the years. My old college dorm, my first apartment, the bars I used to hang out at with friends, my trips to New York, Miami, and LA. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much information I had put out there. All of those little details, those seemingly innocent posts, had been pieced together by someone. They had probably spent months, maybe even years, collecting photos, videos, and posts, assembling them like a puzzle until they had enough to create this fake video. The next day at work, I could barely focus. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, terrified that it was another message from the blackmailer. I felt paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone was watching me. It was like I was living in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. Not my friends, not my family. I was too embarrassed, too scared. I kept thinking, what if they don't believe me? What if they think I actually did something illegal? The shame alone was enough to keep me silent. Instead, I decided to fight back in the only way I could think of. I started researching deepfakes, looking for any way to discredit the video before it could ruin my life. I found countless stories online of people who had gone through something similar. People who had been blackmailed with fake videos or photos that looked almost identical to the real thing. But the more I read, the more hopeless I felt. In most cases, the victims had no way of proving the videos were fake. Even experts had trouble distinguishing between real footage and deepfakes. Eventually, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in cybercrime. He told me what I already knew. Paying the blackmailer wouldn't make the problem go away. If anything, it would only make it worse. But beyond that, there wasn't much he could do. There were no laws in place to protect people from deepfakes, no regulations that could prevent this from happening. It was the Wild West of the internet, and I was just another victim. In the weeks that followed, the messages from the blackmailer kept coming. They threatened to send the video to my boss, to post it publicly on YouTube, to ruin my entire life. I blocked the account, but they just made a new one and kept coming after me. I reported it to Facebook, but their response was slow and unhelpful. They didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the situation. At some point, I stopped checking my messages altogether. I couldn't handle the anxiety anymore. Every time I got a notification, my stomach twisted into knots. It got to the point where I was afraid to even look at my phone. I became paranoid about everything. I deleted half my Facebook friends, scrubbed my profile of any old posts or photos that could be used against me, and set my account to the highest privacy settings possible. But the damage had already been done. The video was out there, floating in the dark corners of the internet, waiting to resurface. And I knew deep down that there was nothing I could do to stop it. Even if I could somehow prove it was fake, the mere existence of the video was enough to make people question me, to plant that seed of doubt in their minds. And that, more than anything, was what terrified me the most. In the end, the blackmailer never followed through on their threats. At least not yet. Maybe they got bored, or maybe they found someone else to target. I don't know. But I'm still living with the fear that one day, out of the blue, that video will resurface, and my life will be turned upside down all over again. The scariest part of this whole experience wasn't the video itself, though. It was the realization of just how vulnerable I really am. We all think we're safe behind our screens, that the things we post online can't hurt us. But the truth is, we're all just one click away from having our lives destroyed by someone we've never even met. And once it happens, there's no going back. It's been over a year since this all started, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I haven't heard from the blackmailer in months, but that doesn't mean I'm in the clear. The fear is always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Every time I log into Facebook, I wonder if today will be the day that everything falls apart. I've stopped posting online as much as I used to. I don't share personal photos anymore, and I never post about where I am or what I'm doing. I'm not writing this to scare anyone, though I guess it's inevitable that some people will be freaked out by my story. But I'm hoping that by sharing what happened to me, I can prevent someone else from going through the same thing. Don't be naive like I was. Don't assume that just because you're a private person, you're safe from this kind of stuff, because the truth is, none of us are. Last year, I found myself in need of a new car. My old Honda Accord, which I had for almost a decade, finally gave up the ghost after pushing it way past what it could handle. The repair costs were piling up, and after talking with my dad, we decided it wasn't worth the effort anymore. So I started looking for a replacement. I didn't have a huge budget, maybe around $5,000, so naturally I started scouring Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for something reliable that wouldn't break the bank. At first, I wasn't having much luck. A lot of the listings were for beat-up cars that looked like they'd fall apart any day now, or they were ridiculously overpriced for what they were offering. I was getting frustrated after weeks of looking. But then one day I stumbled across this listing on Facebook Marketplace for a 2014 Toyota Camry. It was listed for $4,200, which was a pretty damn good price for that model and year, considering how well Toyotas tend to hold their value. The photos showed a clean car, no visible damage, low miles, and the seller's profile looked legit too. A guy named Jason from the suburbs, just a bit outside Detroit. I shot the seller a message and we started chatting. He told me he was selling the car because he had recently upgraded to a newer model and didn't need the old one anymore. He seemed nice enough and willing to answer all my questions. I asked for the VIN and he sent it over, so I did a quick check online to make sure everything was in order. The report came back clean, no accidents, no red flags. I was feeling pretty good about it, to be honest. It seemed like a straightforward deal, and the price was perfect for my budget. We set up a time to meet a few days later. Jason suggested meeting at a shopping plaza in Dearborn, which is a decent area just outside of Detroit. I thought it sounded reasonable. It was a public place with plenty of people around, which made me feel safer about the whole thing. I've bought and sold things through Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace before, and I always meet people in busy areas to avoid any sketchy situations. This seemed like no different. The day of the meetup, I left work a little early and drove to the plaza. It was one of those big ones with a Walmart, a few restaurants, and a bunch of smaller stores scattered around. It was late afternoon, still plenty of daylight, and the parking lot was busy. I pulled into a spot near the middle of the lot and texted Jason to let him know I was there. He replied pretty quickly, saying he was on his way and should be there in about 15 minutes. I told him no rush and just sat in my car, listening to some music while I waited. After about 10 minutes, I noticed a white van pull into the lot. It was one of those older models, the kind you see used for work or deliveries. It didn't really grab my attention at first, but as it got closer, I realized it was headed directly toward me. The van stopped a few spaces away from my car, and two guys stepped out. Neither of them looked like Jason from his profile picture, but I figured maybe he had brought a friend along. Not totally unusual, right? One of the guys, who looked to be in his early 30s, waved at me and started walking over. I rolled down my window, thinking he was going to introduce himself as Jason, but before I could even say anything, the other guy had already circled around to the passenger side of my car. I didn't have time to react before he yanked open the door and slid into the seat next to me. My stomach dropped. The guy who had waved at me was suddenly standing right outside my driver's side door, and before I could lock it, he pulled it open. I was trapped. I immediately realized I was in a bad situation. My heart started racing, but I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe this was some sort of misunderstanding. The guy next to me leaned in close, and I saw that he had a gun tucked under his jacket. He didn't even have to pull it out. Just the sight of it made my blood run cold. He told me to get out of the car. His voice was low, calm, like he'd done this 100 times before. My hands were shaking, but I slowly unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out. The guy standing outside grabbed my arm and led me toward the van. Everything was happening so fast that I couldn't think straight. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. They shoved me into the back of the van, and the door slammed shut behind me. Inside, it was dark and cramped, with a strong smell of gasoline and sweat hanging in the air. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as they pushed me down onto the floor, binding my hands with zip ties. I tried to stay calm, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something, anything, but I couldn't. I was completely helpless. The van started moving, and I could hear the two guys talking in low voices up front. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I knew it wasn't good. All I could think about was whether they were going to kill me or just rob me. I had no idea where we were headed or what they were planning to do. The ride felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only about 15 or 20 minutes. I tried to keep track of the turns, hoping I could figure out where they were taking me, but I quickly lost track. Everything was a blur. I could feel every bump and pothole in the road as the van sped along, taking me further away from the safety of that parking lot. Finally, the van came to a stop. The door swung open, and the two guys dragged me out. We were in some run-down industrial area, probably on the outskirts of town. There were no people around, just a few abandoned warehouses and a scattering of old shipping containers. It was the kind of place you only see in movies. The kind of place where bad things happen. They shoved me up against the side of one of the buildings and started going through my pockets. They took everything. My wallet, my phone, my car keys, even the few crumpled bills I had stuffed in my jeans. One of them pulled out my driver's license and stared at it for a few seconds before laughing quietly to himself. He pocketed it, and I knew then that they had everything they needed to track me down if I ever tried to go to the police. They didn't say much as they rifled through my stuff. The whole thing was eerily quiet, almost clinical. They weren't shouting or threatening me. They didn't have to. The gun was still visible under the jacket of the guy who seemed to be in charge, and that was enough to keep me from doing anything stupid. After they had taken everything, they cut the zip ties on my wrists and told me to get lost. That was it. No grand speeches, no threats. They just told me to walk. I couldn't believe it. I half expected them to shoot me in the back as I walked away, but they didn't. I just stood there for a moment trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. But then I realized I needed to get as far away from that place as possible. I started walking, not even sure where I was headed. My legs felt shaky, and I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified that the van would come back and they'd change their minds. I must have walked for miles, aimlessly wandering through the industrial district, until I finally found a gas station. The guy working inside gave me a strange look when I walked in, covered in dirt with no phone, no wallet, no ID. But he let me use the phone behind the counter to call my dad. That was one of the hardest calls I've ever had to make. My dad was a tough guy, Detroit-born and raised. He had worked in the auto industry for over 30 years, and he wasn't one to show fear easily. But when I told him what had happened, I could hear the worry in his voice. He told me to stay put, that he'd come get me right away. I sat on the curb outside the gas station for what felt like hours, waiting for my dad to show up. Every car that passed made my heart skip a beat, thinking it might be the guys from the van coming back to finish the job. But eventually my dad pulled up in his old pickup truck. I climbed in, and for the first time since it all started, I felt a little bit safer. We didn't say much on the drive home. I could tell my dad was angry, but not at me. At the situation. At the fact that there wasn't much he could do to protect me from something like this. When we got back to the house, I just collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. For the next few days, I didn't leave the house. I didn't want to talk to anyone or deal with the outside world. I felt like an idiot for trusting a random person on Facebook Marketplace. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where I went wrong. I had always been so careful about meeting people in public places, making sure the situation seemed safe. But this time, none of that mattered. Eventually, I filed a police report, but I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere. The guys who did this were probably long gone, using fake names and burner phones to pull off their scams. The cops took down the details and promised to look into it, but I didn't hold out much hope. I figured my car was probably stripped for parts by now, and my wallet and phone were likely sold off within hours of them taking them. I stopped using Facebook Marketplace after that. I couldn't bring myself to trust anyone online anymore. Even now, months later, I still get nervous when I see a white van driving by or when I think about meeting up with someone to buy or sell something. It's a constant reminder that no matter how safe you think you are, there's always a chance that something like this could happen. This all happened last year, when I was living in Denver. I had moved there for a job in marketing a couple of years prior, and was still adjusting to the city. It's a beautiful place, especially if you're into outdoor activities, but the social scene can be a bit hit or miss. I didn't have a huge circle of friends there yet, but I had a solid group of co-workers and a few friends from college who had also ended up in Denver, so I wasn't lonely. One night, I decided to host a small party at my apartment. I live in a decent complex in Capitol Hill, nothing fancy, but the location is great. It's close to downtown and the area has a lot of character. I was excited to have a few friends over for drinks, music, and just a chill evening. It wasn't going to be a big thing, just 5 or 6 of us hanging out. I set up the Facebook event about a week before the party, but I kept it private. I didn't want random people seeing it, and I only invited the friends I actually wanted there. My thinking was that by keeping it private, I could control who knew about it and avoid any awkward situations with uninvited guests showing up. I didn't even post much about it on my regular profile. Just a vague status update that hinted at a low-key gathering with friends. Nothing that would draw too much attention. The days leading up to the party were uneventful. Work was busy, but I managed to get everything ready for the weekend. I had picked up snacks, drinks, and some decorations to make my place feel a bit more festive. It wasn't a huge event by any means, but I wanted to make sure my guests had a good time. The night of the party arrived, and everything was going smoothly. My friends started trickling in around 8 p.m., and we spent the first couple of hours just chatting, catching up on life, and having a few drinks. It was exactly the kind of relaxed, casual vibe I had hoped for. Around 10 p.m., though, something strange happened. My apartment has a buzzer system that guests need to use to get inside the building. When someone arrives, they buzz my apartment and I let them in. I had told everyone I invited to just text me when they arrived and I'd buzz them up. But at some point during the night, the buzzer went off unexpectedly. I assumed it was one of my friends, Maybe someone who had left for a smoke or to grab something from their car. I didn't think much of it. I buzzed the person in without asking who it was. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I was confused because all of my friends were already inside, but I figured maybe one of them had invited someone else without mentioning it. It happens, right? So I went to the door and opened it, expecting to see someone familiar. But the guy standing there wasn't anyone I recognized. He looked to be in his mid-30s, a bit older than the rest of us, with scruffy hair and a disheveled appearance. He was holding a beer bottle in his hand, and he smiled at me like we knew each other. I was immediately on edge. He wasn't dressed for a casual party either. He had on a dirty jacket and worn-out jeans like he had just wandered in off the street. I asked him who he was and what he was doing there, trying to keep my voice calm. He said he had heard about the party from a friend and thought it would be fun to stop by. I felt a wave of confusion and unease wash over me. I didn't know this guy, and I certainly hadn't invited him. I told him that this was a private event and that he must have made a mistake, but he didn't leave. Instead, he started talking about how he had seen the Facebook event and figured it would be okay to join in. That's when my stomach dropped. The event was private. There was no way he should have known about it unless someone had shared the details with him. But I'd only invited a few close friends, and I trusted all of them. None of them would have shared the invite with a random stranger. I quickly realized that something wasn't right. I tried to stay polite but firm, telling him again that this was a private party and he needed to leave. He didn't argue, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. There was something off about him, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He finally shrugged and said he'd leave, but as he turned to go, he muttered something under his breath. I couldn't make out exactly what he said, but it sounded like, "See you around." I shut the door and locked it immediately. My friends were all inside, still having a good time, oblivious to what had just happened. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I tried to brush it off and rejoin the party. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. How did that guy know about my party? And why did he seem so casual about crashing it? As the night went on, I kept thinking about it, and I started to feel more and more anxious. Every time I heard a noise in the hallway or the sound of a car outside, my heart would race. I was on edge, and I couldn't relax. Eventually, the party started winding down and my friends began to head home. I was relieved when the last person left, and I locked up my apartment, feeling a bit safer now that I was alone. The next day, I tried to put the whole thing out of my mind. I figured it was just some random weirdo who had stumbled across the event somehow. And I didn't want to overthink it, but that uneasy feeling stuck with me, nagging at the back of my mind. A few days later, something even stranger happened. I was scrolling through Facebook when I got a friend request from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture was just a blurry image of a street corner, and the name was something generic like John Smith. It didn't raise any immediate red flags, but there was something about the request that made me hesitate. I clicked on the profile and looked through the limited information that was available. There were only a handful of posts, none of which revealed much about the person. The account looked like it had been recently created, with very few friends or interactions. It seemed odd, but I figured it was just another random request from someone I didn't know. I declined it and moved on, not thinking much of it. That night, though, I got another message. This time, it wasn't a friend request. It was a direct message from a different account, again with a vague profile picture and a generic name. The message just asked how I was doing, followed by a smiley face, I ignored it, but the uneasy feeling from the party started creeping back into my mind. Over the next few days, I got more and more of these weird messages from different accounts. All of them were friendly on the surface, but there was something off about them. None of the profiles had any real information, and they all seemed new, like they had been created just to send these messages. I started to feel paranoid, wondering if someone was watching me or tracking my activity online. Then one evening I got another knock at my door. It was late, probably around 9 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and there was another unfamiliar face. This time it was a woman, maybe in her early 40s, standing there with a nervous smile. She didn't look threatening, but I wasn't about to open the door. I asked who she was through the door, and she said she was a friend of a friend and had heard about the party. I felt a surge of panic. That party had happened days ago, and I hadn't mentioned it to anyone since. I hadn't posted about it on Facebook or told anyone else. How was this happening again? I told her there was no party and that she needed to leave. She didn't argue, but as she walked away, I saw her pull out her phone and start texting someone. I stood there, frozen, watching her walk down the hallway and disappear around the corner. I spent the next few hours sitting in my living room, my mind racing. Who were these people? And how were they finding me? Was someone stalking me? I checked my Facebook privacy settings again, making sure everything was locked down as tightly as possible. But I still couldn't figure out how these random people were showing up at my door, claiming to know about a party that had long since ended. A couple of days later, I was walking home from work when I noticed someone following me. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, the same guy was there, keeping his distance but never letting me out of his sight. He was dressed casually, nothing that would make him stand out, but the way he was watching me made my skin crawl. I didn't want to lead him back to my apartment, so I took a detour, heading into a busy coffee shop near downtown. I sat there for a while, sipping a coffee and trying to calm my nerves. After about an hour, I cautiously made my way home, taking a different route to make sure I wasn't being followed. By the time I got back to my apartment, I was exhausted. I locked the door behind me and collapsed onto the couch, feeling a mix of fear and frustration. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any proof that someone was stalking me, and even if I did, I wasn't sure the police would take me seriously. I hadn't been threatened directly, but the constant messages, the strange people showing up at my door, and the feeling of being followed were wearing me down. Over the next few weeks, the messages slowed down, but they never completely stopped. Every now and then, I'd get a random friend request or a message from a fake-looking account. I blocked every one of them, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I stopped using Facebook as much, and when I did, I was careful not to post anything too personal. I even considered deleting my account entirely, but I hesitated, thinking that maybe it would make things worse if I suddenly disappeared from social media. The strange encounters at my door also became less frequent. One day I was talking to a coworker about it, trying to explain what I had been going through. She listened quietly and then asked me if I had ever heard of Facebook event stalking. I hadn't, so she explained that it was a growing issue where people would use social media to track others through their event invites, even if the events were private. Sometimes they would create fake profiles to join groups or friend lists, just to get access to personal details. It sounded insane, but the more she talked about it, the more it made sense. I realized then that I had been far too trusting with my online presence. Even though I thought I had been careful, I hadn't taken the potential dangers seriously enough. I had allowed too much information to slip through the cracks, and now I was paying the price. 2021 was the worst year of my life. It all started out so normal, just another year in my late 20s, working the same job, living in the same apartment in Cleveland, and using Facebook like everyone else. I wasn't one of those obsessive types who posted every single meal or checked in at every place I went to. But, like most people, I used Facebook to stay in touch with friends and family, and to stay in the loop with my local community. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of downtown. My apartment is nothing special, just a small one-bedroom on the second floor of a modest building. It's not a bad place, though. It's close enough to the action, but far enough away that I don't have to deal with too much of the noise and chaos. It's one of those neighborhoods where people leave each other alone for the most part. But you see the same faces often enough to recognize them. You know, the kind of place where you nod politely at people you don't really know, but you still feel a sense of community. This past spring, I decided to expand my social circle a little bit. I had been in Cleveland for a few years, and I knew a few people, but I wasn't as connected as I wanted to be. A lot of my friends had moved away or drifted apart over time, and I found myself spending too many weekends alone in my apartment, scrolling through my phone and watching Netflix. I started thinking it might be time to get more involved in the local scene. Facebook seemed like the easiest way to do that. I joined a couple of local groups, one for young professionals in Cleveland, another for community events in my neighborhood. Through those groups, I started friending people who seemed cool or who had mutual connections with other people I knew. Nothing too crazy, just adding a few new faces here and there. I figured worst case I'd meet some new friends to hang out with on the weekends. Everything seemed fine at first. A few people I added even reached out to chat, and I had a few conversations with some of them. We talked about the usual stuff, local restaurants, events, hobbies. It was nice to feel like I was expanding my social network. But looking back, I realize now that I wasn't nearly as careful as I should have been. I didn't really know these people. I didn't know what they were really about. One of the people I added was a guy named Mark. His profile seemed pretty normal. Just some photos of him at local spots, a few posts about music and sports. Nothing that raised any red flags. He was a friend of someone I knew from college, so when he sent me a friend request, I didn't think much of it. We chatted a little bit about a local concert that was coming up, and I even ran into him at a bar downtown once. We said hey, exchanged a few words, and that was about it. I didn't think anything more of it at the time. A couple of months later, I was planning a weekend trip to visit my parents in Columbus. I hadn't seen them in a while, and I figured it would be nice to get out of the city for a few days. As usual, I posted a quick status update on Facebook about my trip. I didn't think twice about it. I wasn't one of those people who shared every little detail of their life online. But I didn't see any harm in letting people know where I was headed for the weekend. The weekend came and went without any issues. I had a good time with my parents, catching up and relaxing. It was nice to take a break from work and the city for a bit. I got back to Cleveland on Sunday evening feeling refreshed and ready for the week ahead. Little did I know, everything was about to change. When I got back to my apartment, something felt off. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was this strange sense that something wasn't right. I walked through the front door, and that's when I saw it, the mess. My apartment had been ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, papers and clothes were scattered all over the floor, and my electronics were gone. My laptop, my TV, my gaming console, they were all missing. My stomach dropped. My first thought was that I had been robbed, but then I started noticing the smaller details. It wasn't just that my stuff was gone. It was that the burglars seemed to know exactly what to take. They had rifled through my desk and taken my external hard drive, which had all of my personal files on it. They had taken my old camera, which I hadn't used in years, but they left behind some other things that seemed more valuable at first glance. It was like they knew exactly what they were looking for. I called the police, of course, and they came to take a report. They dusted for fingerprints and asked me a bunch of questions, but I could tell they weren't optimistic about catching whoever did this. The officer told me that apartment break-ins like this were usually random, that it was probably just some local kids looking for quick cash. But something about it didn't feel random to me. I started thinking about how the burglars knew I wouldn't be home. I hadn't told many people about my trip to Columbus, just a few close friends and family. The only other place I had mentioned it was on Facebook. And that's when it hit me. Someone on my friends list must have seen my post and used that information to break into my apartment while I was gone. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. I started going through my Facebook friends list, trying to figure out who might have been behind it. I had over 500 friends on there, people from all different stages of my life. But how many of them did I actually know? How many of them could I actually trust? Then I remembered Mark. He was one of the newer friends I had added, and something about him started to feel off. I hadn't talked to him much since that initial conversation about the concert, but I remembered seeing some of his posts about local events and bars. He seemed like the kind of guy who knew a lot of people in the area, maybe even the kind of person who would hear about things like break-ins. I started to wonder if he had something to do with it. I tried not to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random burglary. Whoever did this knew too much about me, when I would be gone, what valuable items I had in my apartment, where I kept my important files. It was like they had been watching me, tracking my movements, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with finding out who was behind the break-in. I went through every detail of my Facebook activity, trying to figure out if I had let something slip that gave them the information they needed. I started to notice things I hadn't paid attention to before. Posts where I had mentioned my schedule, photos that showed the layout of my apartment, even check-ins at local places that could have tipped someone off about my routines. I also started paying more attention to Mark's posts. He was always posting about being out and about in Cleveland, but something about his posts started to feel calculated, like he was trying to build this persona of being a friendly, social guy while keeping an eye on what other people were doing. I couldn't prove it, but I started to suspect that he wasn't just some random guy I had met through Facebook. He was someone who had been watching me, waiting for an opportunity to take advantage of me. As the weeks went on, I couldn't shake the paranoia. I started seeing connections everywhere. Other people I had recently added on Facebook, people who I didn't know all that well, suddenly seemed suspicious. I started unfriending people, locking down my privacy settings, and being extremely careful about what I posted. I even stopped checking in at places or posting about my plans in advance. But the damage was already done. A few months after the break-in, I got a call from the police. They had caught the guys who had broken into my apartment. It turns out they were part of a small group of local criminals who had been targeting people through social media. They would add people as friends on Facebook, monitor their posts, and then use that information to plan break-ins when they knew the person wouldn't be home. And Mark? He was one of them. When the police told me that Mark had been involved, I felt sick to my stomach. He had been watching me the whole time, using my Facebook posts to figure out when I would be out of town and what he could steal from my apartment. I had let him into my life without even realizing it, and he had taken advantage of that trust in the worst possible way. After the police caught Mark and his crew, I thought I would feel some sense of relief. But that's not what happened. Instead, I felt more paranoid than ever. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily it had all happened. How I had unknowingly given a criminal access to my life just by being careless on social media. I had thought I was being smart and cautious, but in reality, I had made myself a target without even realizing it. I started questioning everything I did online. Every post, every friend request, every interaction felt like a potential threat. I stopped using Facebook altogether for a while, but even that didn't make me feel any safer. The damage was done, and the feeling of violation wasn't something that could be undone by simply deleting an app. It's been almost 3 years now since the break-in, and while things have calmed down, I'm still incredibly careful about what I share online. I've cut my friends list down to only people I know and trust, and I've made my privacy settings as tight as possible. I've always been really into gardening. It's kind of been my thing since I was a kid, something I picked up from my grandma. She had this big backyard filled with flowers, vegetables, herbs. You name it, she could grow it. I think that's where I got the bug for it. After I bought my own little house in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland, I was excited to finally have space for my own garden. Nothing too crazy, just a small backyard that I could turn into a nice little haven. For the first couple of years, it was mostly trial and error. I'd post about my garden here and there on Facebook or Instagram, just to share my progress with friends and family. It wasn't like I had a huge following or anything, just a few dozen likes here and there from people I knew. It felt good to show off a little, especially after spending so much time and effort working on it. Eventually, I joined a few gardening groups on Facebook. These groups were pretty active, filled with people from all over the country and even some international folks who shared tips, photos, and advice. It was really helpful, actually. Whenever I had a question about something, I'd post it in the group and get a bunch of responses. People were usually friendly, eager to help, and some even recognized me after a while because I posted pretty regularly. One of the groups was local to Portland, which was great because people would share specific advice for the climate here. You know, what plants work best in the rainy seasons, how to deal with certain pests in the area, that sort of thing. It was comforting in a way to connect with others who shared my interests. There was a sense of community in these groups that made it feel more personal. We all loved gardening, and we were just there to help each other out. I started sharing more and more, especially when I renovated my backyard last spring. I had saved up for a few years to do it properly. New fencing, fresh sod, a few raised beds for vegetables, and a little area where I could plant some flowers and shrubs. I even installed a small pond with a few koi fish. It was the kind of backyard I'd always wanted, and I was proud of it. Naturally, I posted a lot of pictures in the Facebook group showing the progress step by step. People seemed to really like it, and I got a lot of compliments. That's where this whole thing started, I guess. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, that's when I made a mistake. A big one. I had posted a picture of the finished backyard, talking about how I'd finally gotten everything the way I wanted it. In the caption, I mentioned that I lived alone and how much I enjoyed having my own space to work in. It seemed innocent enough at the time. I wasn't thinking about anything other than how proud I was of my work. Over the next few weeks, I kept posting updates here and there, little things, like when my tomatoes started coming in or when I added a new flower bed. One day, though, I noticed something strange. I got a message from someone in the gardening group, a guy I didn't recognize. His profile picture was just a close-up of some plants, so I couldn't tell much from that. The message was weird, though. It wasn't like the usual ones I'd get asking for advice or giving compliments. He just asked me if I lived near a certain neighborhood in Portland. It threw me off. I hadn't mentioned my specific neighborhood in any of my posts. I had kept things pretty vague, just talking about Portland in general. I ignored the message at first, chalking it up to someone just being overly friendly or curious. But it stuck with me. A few days later, the same guy messaged me again, this time asking about my garden directly. He mentioned specific details, things that I hadn't talked about in the group, like the layout of my backyard and where I had placed certain plants. That really freaked me out. I went back through my posts, trying to see if maybe I had accidentally given away more information than I thought. I didn't remember posting anything that detailed, but the more I scrolled, the more I started to worry. It was possible, I realized, that someone could piece things together from my pictures and captions. Maybe I had been too casual about what I was sharing. I didn't respond to the guy's second message, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started feeling uneasy, like maybe I had made a mistake by being so open in the group. I debated whether to leave the group altogether, but it felt like an overreaction. It was just one guy, right? Maybe he was just a little too interested in my garden. But then things got worse. A few nights later, I was sitting in my living room just relaxing after work. It was late, probably around 10 p.m., and I was flipping through channels on TV when I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some animal rustling around in the bushes. I live in a quiet area, so noises like that aren't uncommon. But then I heard it again, this time louder, like someone was walking around in my backyard. My heart started racing. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I got up and went to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. In the dim light, I saw a figure moving through my garden. My stomach dropped. It was a man, tall, wearing dark clothes, crouched low near one of the flower beds. I couldn't see his face clearly, but he was definitely there, moving deliberately, like he was searching for something. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My phone was on the couch just a few steps away, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just stood there, watching this stranger in my backyard, terrified that if I made any noise, he would notice me. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally stood up and walked toward the back fence. He climbed over it quickly and disappeared into the night. I stood there for a long time, staring out into the empty yard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and called the police. When they arrived, I told them what I had seen, but there wasn't much they could do. The guy was long gone by the time they showed up, and there wasn't any clear evidence that he had taken anything. The officers walked around the yard, shining their flashlights into the bushes and checking the fence, but they didn't find anything. They told me to be careful and to call them again if anything else happened. That was it. I locked up my house as best as I could, but I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound outside made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the man might come back. The next day, I tried to act like everything was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about the man in my yard. Who was he? Why was he there? Was it just some random prowler, or was it something more? I started going through my Facebook messages again, and that's when I saw it. Another message from the same guy in the gardening group. This time, he didn't ask any questions. He just sent a single word. Nice garden. That was it. No explanation, no context. Just those 2 words. My heart started pounding. I knew it had to be him. The guy in my backyard. He had seen my garden, the one I had posted all those pictures of. He knew where I lived. Or at least he had figured it out somehow. I felt sick to my stomach. I had been so careless posting all those details online, never thinking that someone might use that information against me. I blocked him immediately, but the damage was already done. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had found me, how he had been in my yard right outside my house. I went through all of my posts again, deleting anything that seemed too personal, anything that might give away more information than I had intended. But it was too late. He already knew where I lived. For the next few weeks, I was on edge constantly. I started leaving the lights on in my backyard at night, hoping that it would deter anyone from creeping around. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows before bed, and I stopped posting anything online about my garden or my home. But the fear never went away. Every time I walked into my backyard, I felt exposed, like someone could be watching me from the shadows. One night, a couple of weeks after the first incident, it happened again. I was asleep when I heard a noise outside, this time louder, like something had fallen over. I jumped out of bed, my heart racing, and ran to the window. Sure enough, there was someone in my backyard again. This time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. They arrived quickly, and this time they found something. One of the officers spotted a shoe print in the dirt near the fence, and they said it looked fresh. They didn't find the guy, but at least now they had some evidence that someone had been there. They told me to be careful, to keep my doors and windows locked, and to call them if anything else happened. After that, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped gardening altogether. It broke my heart because it was something I had loved for so long, but I couldn't enjoy it anymore. Every time I stepped into my backyard, all I could think about was that man, the one who had been watching me, creeping around in the dark. I eventually moved out of that house, away from the neighborhood I had once loved. I never went back to the gardening groups on Facebook, and I became extremely cautious about what I shared online. This story starts about a year ago. I was scrolling through Facebook on a Friday night, just mindlessly looking through posts, when I got a friend request from someone I didn't recognize. The profile picture was of a woman, a really attractive woman. Her name was Jessica. I didn't remember meeting her anywhere, but her profile looked real enough. She had a few dozen friends, some photos and posts that went back several months. I figured maybe she was someone I had met through mutual friends or maybe even at a work event. It wasn't totally unusual for me to get random friend requests like this from time to time, so I didn't think too much of it. I accepted the request, and a few days later she messaged me. The conversation started off pretty innocently, just small talk. She mentioned that she had found me through a mutual friend, though she didn't specify who, and that she was new to Philly. She seemed friendly. And honestly, I was a bit flattered that someone like her would take the time to message me. I'm not exactly what you'd call a ladies' man, so I was excited about the attention, even though I tried not to get too ahead of myself. Over the next couple of weeks, we chatted more and more. It started off casual, but then it got a little flirty. She complimented me on my looks, told me she liked my sense of humor, and even started hinting that she wanted to meet up in person at some point. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't into it. It felt good to have someone show interest in me, especially since I had been single for a while and hadn't really been putting myself out there much. Things escalated pretty quickly after that. Jessica started sending me some pretty provocative messages, along with a few photos that left little to the imagination. I was shocked at first. This kind of thing had never happened to me before, but I got caught up in it. She was so forward, so confident, and I guess that pulled me in. She kept asking me to send her some photos in return, and eventually I caved. I wasn't proud of it, but I sent her a few pictures. Nothing too crazy, but still enough to make me feel a little uneasy afterward. At first, everything seemed fine. We kept talking, and she seemed even more interested in meeting up. But then things took a turn. A couple of days after I sent her the photos, she messaged me again, but this time the tone was completely different. She wasn't flirty or friendly anymore. Instead, she sent me a long message saying that unless I sent her money, she was going to share the photos I had sent her with all of my Facebook friends, including my family and coworkers. She even sent me screenshots of my friend list to prove that she wasn't bluffing. I remember feeling like my heart had just stopped when I read that message. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. It was like the ground had dropped out from under me. She had seemed so real, so genuine. But now I was realizing that I had fallen for some kind of scam. I had no idea what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore her and hope that it was just a bluff, but the other part of me was terrified that she really would follow through with her threat. I asked her how much she wanted, and she said $500. She gave me her PayPal information and told me that if I didn't send the money within 24 hours, she'd send the photos to everyone on my friends list. She even reminded me of a few specific people like my mom, my boss, and a couple of old friends from college, just to make sure I knew she was serious. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had always thought I was smart enough to avoid stuff like this, but I had let my guard down. I was so embarrassed, so ashamed, and I was terrified of what would happen if those photos got out. It would ruin me, professionally and personally. I was supposed to be the guy who had it together, but now I was at the mercy of some stranger who had manipulated me into this situation. I spent the entire night panicking. I barely slept, and when I did, I had nightmares about people seeing those photos, about losing my job, about my mom finding out. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't see any other way out. I sent her the money. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. A couple of days later, she messaged me again, demanding more money. This time, she wanted $1,000. I had hoped that once I paid her the first time, she'd leave me alone, but now I realized that she was never going to stop. She had me on the hook, and she wasn't going to let go until she had drained me of everything she could. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. And even if I did, I knew that paying her again wouldn't make this go away. It would only make it worse. But I couldn't go to the police. What was I going to tell them? That I had sent explicit photos to some random person on the internet? I felt like such an idiot, like this was all my fault. I tried to reason with her, to tell her that I didn't have the money, but she didn't care. She just kept threatening me, saying that if I didn't pay up, she'd send the photos to everyone. I could feel the walls closing in around me. I didn't see a way out of this. That's when I decided to reach out to a friend of mine who worked in cybersecurity. I hadn't told anyone about what was going on up until that point, but I was desperate, and I needed help. I called him up and told him everything about Jessica, the photos, the blackmail. I was embarrassed, but he was surprisingly understanding. He didn't judge me. He just listened and told me that I wasn't the first person this had happened to. He explained that this was a common scam, catfishing it's called, where scammers create fake profiles to lure people in, get them to send compromising photos or information, and then blackmail them for money. He told me that once they had their hooks in, They rarely let go unless they thought they couldn't get any more out of you. He also warned me that paying her again wouldn't stop her. It would only encourage her to keep asking for more. He helped me report the profile to Facebook, and he walked me through the process of blocking her on all social media platforms. He also recommended that I change all of my passwords and take steps to protect my accounts in case she had managed to gain access to any of them. For the next few days, I was a nervous wreck. I was constantly checking my Facebook, my email, and my phone, waiting for some sign that she had followed through on her threats. But nothing happened. The profile disappeared, and I never heard from her again. I got lucky, I guess. She must have moved on to her next victim when she realized I wasn't going to pay her anymore. But the damage had been done. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the fear that someone could use my own actions against me like that. I had let my guard down, and I had paid the price. It's been a while since all of this happened, and I've taken a lot of steps to protect myself online since then. I'm much more careful about who I talk to on social media, and I've tightened up all of my privacy settings. I don't add people I don't know anymore, no matter how real their profile seems, and I don't send photos like that to anyone, no matter how much I think I can trust them. But the fear still lingers. Every time I get a friend request from someone I don't recognize, I feel a knot in my stomach. I can't help but wonder if it's going to happen again, if I'm going to fall for another scam. It's a fear that never really goes away, even after you've moved on from the initial shock of it. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you can never be too careful online. No matter how real someone seems, you never really know who's on the other side of that screen. And once you've made a mistake, there's no taking it back. All you can do is try to learn from it and protect yourself from it happening again. I'm sharing this because I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. It's easy to think that you're smart enough to avoid these kinds of scams, that it could never happen to you. But the truth is, it can happen to anyone. These people are experts at what they do. They know how to make you feel comfortable, how to gain your trust, and how to exploit your weaknesses. Don't let yourself become their next victim. Be careful about who you talk to online and be cautious about what you share. It's better to be safe than sorry. This all started 2 years ago when I decided to share some memories from my childhood. I've always been a nostalgic person. My family moved around a lot when I was younger, and I've lived in cities all over the Midwest. I guess that's why I liked looking back at old photos. Those pictures were my way of staying connected to all the places and people I had left behind. So one weekend, I was going through some old photo albums at my apartment in Milwaukee. I hadn't gone through them in years, and flipping through the pages brought back all kinds of memories. There were pictures of family holidays, birthdays, my old house, my elementary school friends, and even some random shots of the neighborhood where I grew up. It made me feel connected to a time when life was simpler. I decided to scan a few of the pictures and post them on Facebook. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, just thought it would be fun to share some old memories with my friends and family. Most of them had never seen these photos before, and I figured it might be a nice way to reconnect with people I hadn't talked to in a while. I posted a few of my favorite ones: a photo of my old house in Ohio, a picture of me and my siblings playing in the yard, and a couple of shots from various family vacations. The response was pretty normal at first. People liked the photos, left comments about how cute I was as a kid, and some even shared their own childhood memories in the comments. It felt like a wholesome little moment of nostalgia. But then, after a few days, things started to get weird. I received a private message from someone I didn't recognize. His profile picture was generic, a landscape shot of some random street, and his name didn't ring any bells. The message itself was short and casual. He said he had seen the photos I posted and that they reminded him of his own childhood. He mentioned that he had grown up in Ohio as well, and that my old house looked similar to one he used to pass by on his way to school. At first, I didn't think much of it. I responded politely, telling him that I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I asked if he was from the same area. We exchanged a few more messages, just casual conversation about our childhoods. He didn't say anything alarming, and his questions seemed innocent enough. I figured he was just another person who had stumbled across my post and was feeling nostalgic like I was. But then, his messages started getting a bit more specific. He asked me if I remembered certain places in the town, places I hadn't mentioned in my post. He asked if I remembered a park that used to be near my old house, and if I had ever gone to a certain corner store down the street. That's when I started feeling a little uneasy. I hadn't mentioned any of those details in my post, and I couldn't figure out how he knew about them. I asked him if he had grown up in the same town, thinking maybe he was just someone who had lived nearby and recognized the area from the photos. But his response was vague. He didn't directly answer my question, and instead just said something like how the world is a small place. That didn't sit right with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that something felt off. I decided to stop responding to his messages. I didn't block him or anything. At that point, I didn't think it was necessary. I just figured if I ignored him, he'd lose interest and move on. For a few days, things were quiet. I didn't hear from him again, and I started to forget about the whole thing. Then one evening, I received another message from him. This time, it wasn't just small talk. He sent me a photo. It was a picture of my old house, the same house I had posted in my original Facebook post. But it wasn't one of the photos I had shared. This was a new picture, taken from a different angle, as if someone had stood across the street and snapped it recently. The house looked the same, but it had aged. The yard was overgrown, and the paint on the shutters had started to peel. It was clear that this wasn't an old photo from my childhood. It was recent. I stared at the photo, my mind racing. How did he have this picture? I hadn't been back to that house in years. My family had moved away long ago, and as far as I knew, it was now owned by someone else. The whole thing sent a chill down my spine. It was one thing for this guy to talk about places in my old town, but it was another for him to have a recent picture of my childhood home. I replied, asking him how he had the photo. His response was short and unsettling. He said that he passed by it recently and thought I might like to see how it looked now. That didn't make any sense to me. I had never told him the exact address, and even if he had somehow figured it out, why would he go out of his way to take a picture of it? At that point, I started to get really freaked out. I blocked him immediately and went back to my Facebook posts, making everything private. I deleted the photos I had shared and locked down my account as much as possible. I figured that would be the end of it, that once he realized he couldn't contact me anymore, he'd move on. But it didn't end there. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. I wasn't expecting anything, so when I saw the envelope with no return address, I was curious but cautious. I opened it and my heart sank. Inside was another photo, this time of my current apartment building in Milwaukee. It was taken from across the street, just like the photo of my old house. The picture showed the entrance to the building, and in the corner of the photo, I could see my car parked in its usual spot. There was no note with the photo, just the image itself, like a silent message meant to let me know that someone had found me. I felt sick. My mind started racing with questions. How did he know where I lived? Had he followed me? Was he watching me? I called the police and reported the letter, but there wasn't much they could do. They took down the information and told me to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. But without any real evidence of a threat, they couldn't do much more than that. They suggested I get a security camera for my apartment just in case, and told me to report anything else that seemed off. For the next few weeks, I was constantly on edge. Every time I left my apartment, I found myself looking over my shoulder wondering if someone was watching me. I started taking different routes to work, parking my car in different spots and avoiding going out at night. I even stopped using Facebook altogether, terrified that somehow this guy was still keeping tabs on me. One night I came home from work late. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. As I walked up to my apartment building, I noticed something on the ground near my front door. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash or maybe a flyer that someone had left, but when I got closer, I saw that it was another photo. This time, it was a picture of me. The photo had clearly been taken without my knowledge. It showed me walking down the street, probably on my way to work. I was looking down at my phone, completely unaware that someone had been there, watching me taking pictures. My heart raced as I looked around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty. I went inside and called the police again. They came by and took the photo, but once again there wasn't much they could do. There was no way to trace where the photo had come from, and they couldn't prove that it was connected to the previous incidents. They told me to be careful and suggested that I might want to stay with a friend or family member for a while, just to be safe. I ended up staying with a friend for a few nights, but even that didn't make me feel completely safe. The idea that someone had been following me, taking pictures of me, and sending them to me without any clear motive was terrifying. I couldn't shake the fear that this person was still out there watching, waiting for the right moment to do something worse. After a week of staying with my friend, I decided to go back to my apartment. I couldn't live in fear forever, and I hoped that maybe the whole thing had blown over. But when I got home, I found another letter waiting for me. Inside was a note, just a single sentence, written in neat, precise handwriting. It said, "I'll always know where you are." That was the last straw for me. I packed up my things and moved out of that apartment within a week. I didn't care about breaking my lease or losing my security deposit. I just needed to get out. I moved to a different part of the city, changed my phone number, and completely deleted my Facebook account. I even stopped using social media altogether, too afraid that somehow this person would find me again. It's been almost a year and a half since I moved, and while I haven't received any more letters or photos, the fear hasn't gone away. I still don't know who that person was or why they targeted me. I don't know how they found my childhood home or how they tracked me down in Milwaukee. And the worst part is I'll probably never know. I always thought I was pretty careful online. I don't consider myself overly paranoid, but I don't post every detail of my life either. I've got a decent job at a tech firm in Dallas, and between that and keeping up with family and friends back in Chicago, Facebook was mostly just a way to stay in touch with people, the usual checking in, sharing funny memes, catching up with high school friends I hadn't seen in years. Nothing too personal. It was just part of the background noise of life. Then, a few months ago, something happened that completely changed the way I see social media. It started with a seemingly innocent notification. I remember I was sitting at my desk at work, just going through emails and sipping my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a Facebook notification telling me my account had been logged into from a new location. At first, I didn't think much of it. These things happen, right? Sometimes Facebook just glitches and sends you a warning for no reason. But then I got another notification, this time saying my password had been changed. My heart skipped a beat. I knew immediately that something was wrong. I tried to log in, but I was already locked out. My password wasn't working, and no matter what I did, I couldn't regain access. Panic started to set in as I realized someone had taken control of my account. I followed the usual steps, clicked, forgot password, tried to reset it, but I never got the recovery email. I checked my spam folder, refreshed my inbox, but there was nothing. I tried again, thinking maybe I had mistyped something, but still no luck. My account was completely out of my hands. Whoever had taken it had already changed the email address associated with my account. They had locked me out of my own life. At first, I was just annoyed. I figured I'd contact Facebook support, they'd sort it out, and I'd get my account back in no time. But getting through to Facebook was like trying to yell through a brick wall. I filled out their forms, sent in requests, but all I got back were automated responses telling me to follow the steps I had already tried. It felt like I was screaming into the void while someone else was out there controlling my online presence. Hours passed, and I still couldn't get into my account. What made it worse was that I started getting texts from friends. They were asking me about weird messages they'd been receiving from my profile. Some of the messages were asking for money, claiming I was in an emergency situation and needed help. Others were just random links to sketchy websites. One of my friends told me she had clicked on one of the links, and her account got flooded with spam afterward. She was pissed, and I didn't blame her. I realized then that whoever had hijacked my account wasn't just locking me out. They were actively using it to scam people I knew. I felt sick to my stomach. My Facebook wasn't just mine anymore. It was being used to trick and manipulate people in my life. People who trusted me. I tried to warn everyone. I sent out mass texts and posted on Instagram, since that account was still safe, telling people not to trust anything that came from my Facebook profile. But by then, the damage had already been done. I found out later that a few of my friends had actually sent money to the scammer thinking they were helping me out of some dire situation. They were out hundreds of dollars because of it. I couldn't believe this was happening. As the day went on, the messages from friends kept coming. They started telling me about even more personal-sounding messages. The hacker wasn't just sending out generic requests for money anymore. They were using information from my old Facebook messages, private conversations I had with people, and using that to manipulate them. They knew details about my life, my friends, my family. They were using my own words against the people I cared about. I felt completely powerless. Every attempt I made to regain control of my account was met with dead ends. Facebook's security process was slow, and the more time passed, the more damage this person was doing. I didn't know what to do. It was like someone had hijacked a part of my life, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. A couple of days passed, and I was still locked out. By then, I had reached out to pretty much everyone I knew, trying to warn them. But the hacker didn't stop. They kept sending messages, kept trying to scam people. Some of my friends started blocking me on Facebook just to stop the messages from coming. I didn't blame them, but it still hurt. My own account was being used to push people away from me. One morning, I woke up to find that things had gotten even worse. My phone was blowing up with notifications from people I hadn't talked to in years, old coworkers, distant relatives, even some people I had completely forgotten about. The hacker had started sending out mass friend requests to random people on my friends list. They were spreading the scam even further, using my identity to target more and more people. And I couldn't do anything about it. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was humiliating. My entire digital presence had been taken over, and it felt like I was watching someone parade around in my skin. They were impersonating me, making me look like a scam artist, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I felt like I was losing control of my own identity. Then, about a week after the initial hack, things took an even darker turn. I started getting calls from family members. They were panicked, saying that someone had been messaging them from my account, threatening them. They were receiving personal threats, things that referenced specific details about their lives. The hacker was using information from old Facebook posts and messages to target them, digging into their fears and using it against them. That was the breaking point for me. I realized that this wasn't just some random scammer looking for quick cash. This was something more personal, more malicious. Whoever had taken over my account wasn't just trying to make money. They were trying to hurt me and the people around me. It felt like someone was deliberately trying to destroy my relationships, my reputation, and my sense of security. I finally decided to go to the police. I didn't think they'd be able to do much, but I needed to report it. They took down the details, and while they were sympathetic, they basically told me that there wasn't much they could do about an online account being hacked. It was a frustrating experience, knowing that there was a real person out there behind all of this, but having no way of finding out who they were or stopping them. At this point, I had given up hope of ever getting my account back. I just wanted the harassment to stop. I contacted Facebook again, this time with more urgency, explaining that my account wasn't just hacked, it was being used to threaten people. I finally got a response from a real person, and they told me they would investigate the situation. It took another couple of days, but eventually they disabled the account entirely. It was a relief, but it also felt like a loss. That account had been a part of my life for over a decade, and now it was gone. The immediate threat was over, but the damage was done. I had to deal with the fallout for weeks afterward. Some of my friends never really got over what happened. They couldn't separate me from the scammer who had taken over my account. They didn't trust me anymore, even though I had nothing to do with it. My family was shaken by the threats they had received, and it took a long time for things to feel normal again. I ended up deleting most of my social media accounts after that. I couldn't bring myself to trust them anymore. Even now, months later, I'm still paranoid about online security. I've locked down everything I possibly can. Two-factor authentication, complex passwords, everything. But that sense of vulnerability never really goes away. I learned the hard way that we're all just one hack away from losing control of our digital lives, and once it happens, it's almost impossible to put the pieces back together. It's scary to think about how much power we give to these platforms, how much of our lives are tied up in them. When you lose control of your account, it's not just about losing access to a website, it's about losing control of your identity, and in the wrong hands, that can be devastating. I wouldn't wish that feeling on anyone. I used to love looking through my Facebook memories. It's one of those small things that makes you realize how much your life has changed over the years, how you've grown, and how much you've been through. Every day, I'd get a little notification showing me what I posted a year, 5 years, or even 10 years ago. Most of it was harmless. Photos of old friends, trips I'd taken, random thoughts or jokes I'd shared. It was always kind of comforting, like flipping through an old photo album but without the dust. I didn't think twice about sharing those memories again sometimes. It felt like a way to relive the past for a brief moment, to show how far I've come or to remember a different time in my life. It felt like such a harmless thing to do. Just a small way of staying connected with myself and with people from my past. But I never really considered who might be paying attention to all of that. I never thought about who might be lurking in the background, reading every little thing I posted. I guess I always assumed that the people who were seeing my posts were the same people I was friends with, people who knew me. I never thought there could be someone out there who was quietly piecing together my life, detail by detail, waiting for the right moment to turn it all against me. It started innocently enough, as these things usually do. I posted an old memory of a road trip I had taken with some friends back in college. The photo was nothing special, just a picture of us standing next to the car, smiling and covered in dust after a day of hiking. It was one of those carefree moments that felt nice to look back on. I shared it with a little caption about how much fun we had that day, and a few of my old friends commented, reminiscing about the trip. A few days after that, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. His name was Michael, and his profile picture was one of those generic-looking images, just him in sunglasses standing in front of some building. I didn't remember ever meeting him, but he mentioned that he had seen the photo I posted, and that it reminded him of a trip he had taken to the same place around the same time. He asked if I remembered him from back then, saying we might have crossed paths. At first I thought maybe he was someone I had met briefly during that trip and just didn't remember. I've met a lot of people over the years, and it's not uncommon for someone to pop up and claim we've met before, even if I can't quite place them. So I responded politely, saying I wasn't sure, but that it was possible we had run into each other. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I wish I had just ignored him. Over the next few days, Michael started messaging me more frequently. He was friendly enough, asking about other trips I had taken or mentioning places we both had in common. At first I didn't see any harm in it. It felt like just another random person reconnecting over shared experiences. But then he started asking more specific questions. Questions that made me feel uneasy. He'd ask about places I used to live, jobs I'd had, and people I knew from those times. He'd bring up small details that I had posted years ago, things I had almost forgotten about myself. He'd reference old relationships, friendships that had ended, and even little things like where I used to go for coffee when I lived in a certain city. It was unsettling, but I figured he had just been following my posts for a while and remembered more than most people would. Then it got worse. One day I posted another memory. This time of an ex-boyfriend I had dated years ago when I was living in Chicago. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a casual post about an old date we had gone on, accompanied by a photo of us at a restaurant. The relationship had ended a long time ago, and I hadn't spoken to him in years. But it was a good memory at the time, so I didn't see any harm in sharing it. Michael messaged me again that night, but this time, his tone was different. He didn't ask me about the photo or comment on the memory. Instead, he sent me a screenshot of an old post I had made years ago, one that I had forgotten even existed. It was a post I had made during the breakup with that same ex-boyfriend. In the post, I had vented about how hurt I was, how betrayed I felt by him, and how much I hated the way things had ended. It was raw and emotional, something I never intended to revisit, and seeing it again made my stomach churn. I hadn't shared that post in years. It wasn't even one of my Facebook memories. The fact that Michael had found it meant that he had been digging through my old posts, scrolling back through years of my life to find this one moment of vulnerability. It felt invasive, like someone had rifled through my diary without permission. I asked him why he had sent me that, and his response was vague, something about how it stood out to him. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a weird coincidence. But deep down, I felt a growing sense of unease. Over the next few weeks, I became more cautious about what I posted. I stopped sharing my Facebook memories, stopped posting about my past, and even started going through my old posts, deleting anything that felt too personal. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. One night, I was sitting at home when I got another message from Michael. This time, It wasn't just a screenshot of an old post. It was a photo, one I hadn't seen in years. It was a picture of the house I grew up in, the same house I had posted about months earlier. But this photo wasn't from my childhood. It was recent. The house looked older, the paint a little more faded, the yard a little more overgrown. It was clear that someone had taken this photo recently, like within the last few weeks. My heart raced as I stared at the photo. I hadn't been back to that house in years. My family had sold it a long time ago, and I had no reason to go back. How did Michael have this photo? How did he know where I grew up? I hadn't posted the address or even mentioned the specific town in any of my posts. I had been careful about that, so how did he know? I messaged him, asking him where he had gotten the photo. His response was chilling. He told me that he had visited the area recently and thought I might like to see how the old place looked. He mentioned specific details about the house, things that weren't in the photo, like the color of the front door, the garden in the backyard, and even the tree I used to climb as a kid. There was no way he could have known those things unless he had been there. I didn't respond to his message. Instead, I blocked him immediately and went through my entire friends list, trying to figure out if there was anyone else who seemed suspicious. I deleted anyone I didn't recognize, locked down my privacy settings, and even considered deleting my account altogether. But that feeling of safety I used to have on social media was gone. No matter what I did, it felt like he could still see me, still find ways to track my life. The next few days were tense. I was constantly checking over my shoulder, always feeling like someone was watching me, waiting for something else to happen. I couldn't focus at work, and I barely slept. I kept wondering if he had followed me in real life, if he knew where I lived now, if he was going to show up at my door. Then, one night, I got another message. This time it was from a different account, a new profile with no photo, no information, just a blank slate. The message was simple: "I'll always know where you are." There was no name attached, but I knew it was him. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He had created a new account just to continue messaging me, just to keep reminding me that no matter what I did, I couldn't escape him. I reported the account to Facebook, but nothing happened. The messages kept coming, always from new accounts, always vague and threatening. He never directly said he was going to hurt me, but the implication was always there. He wanted me to know that he could find me, that he knew my past, my present, and possibly even my future. I stopped using Facebook altogether after that. I deleted my account, wiped my old posts, and cut myself off from social media as much as possible. I moved to a different apartment, changed my phone number, and started using a different email address for everything. But even with all of those precautions, I couldn't shake the fear that he was still out there, still watching, still waiting. It's been months since I last heard from him, but the fear hasn't gone away. Every time I see a new friend request or get an unexpected email, my heart skips a beat. I can't help but wonder if it's him, if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to remind me that he's always watching. A couple of years ago, I was in a bit of a rough patch. I had been working as a graphic designer in Atlanta for a small firm, but after a round of layoffs, I found myself without a job. It wasn't completely unexpected, but it still hit me hard. I spent the next few months frantically applying to any job I could find, trying to stay afloat while my savings slowly dwindled away. During this time, I became more reliant on social media to network and look for job opportunities. I had always used LinkedIn and some freelance job boards, but I found myself scrolling through Facebook more often, joining groups for creatives and networking with people in my field. I even started posting about my job search, hoping that someone might see it and point me toward an opportunity. One day, out of the blue, I got a message on Facebook from a guy named James. His profile seemed normal enough. Pictures of him at work events, a few posts about his hobbies, and mutual connections with some people I knew from the design community in Atlanta. He introduced himself as a recruiter for a marketing company in Chicago and said he had seen my portfolio online. He told me his company was expanding and looking for designers to work remotely on a freelance basis, with the possibility of going full-time in the future. It sounded promising. The way he presented the opportunity made it seem legitimate. He even attached some details about the company and the types of projects they were working on. I did a quick Google search, and sure enough, there was a real company by that name with an office in Chicago. It seemed like a great opportunity, and at that point I was desperate for work, so I was excited. We exchanged messages over the next couple of days, and everything seemed to check out. He told me that the company had reviewed my portfolio and wanted to move forward with the hiring process. They were ready to offer me a freelance contract with competitive pay, and all I needed to do was provide some basic information so they could set me up in their system. He sent over a standard-looking application form that asked for my name, address, phone number, and email. Nothing out of the ordinary. I filled it out and sent it back, thinking that was the end of it. But a few hours later, James messaged me again, saying the company also needed my social security number for tax purposes, as well as my bank account information for direct deposit. This was the first red flag that gave me pause. I had done freelance work before, and it wasn't unusual to provide that information for tax reasons, but something about the way he asked for it felt off. Still, I was in a tough spot financially. I had been out of work for months, and the idea of finally landing a paying gig, especially with a company that could potentially offer a full-time position, was too tempting to ignore. I hesitated for a bit, but eventually decided to send the information. I told myself it was just part of the process, and that this was a legitimate opportunity. That was my first big mistake. After I sent the information, I didn't hear from James for a couple of days. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe things were just moving slowly on their end. Or maybe they were finalizing the contract. But after about a week of silence, I started getting anxious. I tried messaging him again, asking for an update on the project and when I could expect to start, but I didn't get a response. Then one morning, I woke up to find my bank account had been completely drained. Every penny I had left was gone. I remember staring at my banking app in disbelief, trying to make sense of what had happened. There were multiple unauthorized transactions, all made within the span of a few hours. I immediately called my bank and reported the fraud, but the damage was already done. My account was wiped out, and it would take weeks before any of the charges could be reversed, if they could be reversed at all. Panic set in. I tried messaging James again, but his profile had disappeared. Not just blocked me, completely gone as if it had never existed. I searched for the company he claimed to work for and called their office in Chicago. But when I asked about James, they told me they had no idea who he was. No one by that name worked there, and they weren't hiring for any remote positions. I felt sick. It hit me all at once that I had been scammed. I had handed over my personal information, my social security number, my bank account details, to some stranger on Facebook, and now I was paying the price. I had been so desperate for a job, so eager to believe that this was a real opportunity, that I had ignored the warning signs. And now, my financial situation had gone from bad to worse. I reported the scam to the police, but there wasn't much they could do. They took down my information and filed a report, but they told me that online scams like this were hard to trace. The scammer had probably used a fake name and a burner phone, and his Facebook profile had been deleted before they could even begin to investigate. They advised me to contact the credit bureaus to freeze my credit and to keep an eye on my accounts for any signs of identity theft. The next few weeks were a nightmare. I was constantly on edge, checking my bank accounts and credit reports every day, terrified that more damage would be done. I had to deal with the fallout of having my social security number stolen, calls with credit agencies, trying to protect myself from further identity theft, and dealing with the bank to recover what little money I could. But it didn't end there. A few weeks after the scam, I started getting phone calls from unfamiliar numbers. At first, I thought they were just telemarketers, but when I answered, the voice on the other end was always the same, calm, almost casual. The man never said much. He'd just ask me how I was doing, say something vague about work, and then hang up before I could respond. It was eerie. I couldn't tell if it was James or someone else, but the calls kept coming, always from different numbers. It was like he was letting me know that he hadn't forgotten about me, that he still had my information and could reach me whenever he wanted. I blocked the numbers, but new ones kept popping up. Sometimes I'd get voicemails with nothing but silence. Other times, the man would leave short, cryptic messages like, "Hope things are looking up for you," or "Take care of yourself out there." They weren't direct threats, but they were unsettling. It felt like he was playing with me, reminding me that he still had control. I became paranoid. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers altogether and changed my phone number, hoping that would stop the harassment. But even after changing my number, I still felt vulnerable. I knew that whoever this was had my social security number, my bank details, and enough personal information to potentially ruin my life. The thought of that kind of power in the hands of someone who had already scammed me made it hard to sleep at night. The financial toll was bad enough, but the psychological impact was worse. I became hyper-vigilant about everything I did online. I stopped using social media altogether, afraid that I might fall for another scam, or that someone else might be watching me. I triple-checked every email, every message, every call, constantly second-guessing myself, wondering if it was real or another attempt to exploit me. I spent months trying to clean up the mess. I had to take on a second job just to make ends meet after my savings were wiped out, and I was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I didn't know if the scammer would come after me again, or if my personal information would be sold to someone else who would use it to open accounts in my name or take out loans. It felt like a time bomb was ticking, and I had no idea when or if it would go off. I still don't know who James really was or how he found me in the first place. Maybe he had seen my posts about looking for work and figured I was an easy target. Maybe he had been following me for a while, waiting for the right moment to strike. I'll probably never know. Last year, I went through a pretty bad breakup. We had been together for almost 3 years, and when it ended, I found myself feeling really lonely. I spent a lot of time by myself, just going through the motions of life, trying to get past it. To cope with that loneliness, I started getting more active on social media. I'd scroll through Facebook a lot, looking at old pictures, posts from the past, and reconnecting with people I hadn't talked to in a long time. It was comforting in a way. Reaching out to old friends reminded me that I wasn't completely alone, even though it felt that way. One day, I got a friend request from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Sarah, a girl I went to high school with back in Chicago. We weren't super close back then, but we had some mutual friends and hung out at a few parties. She had always been nice enough, but after high school, we drifted apart. So when I saw her friend request pop up, I was surprised, but not too suspicious. I figured she was just reaching out, like a lot of people do, reconnecting with old acquaintances. I accepted the request, and a few days later, she sent me a message. At first, it was just small talk, catching up on life, reminiscing about high school, talking about how much things had changed since then. She told me she had recently moved to Boston for work, which was a coincidence because that's where I lived now too. We chatted off and on for the next few weeks, and it was nice. It felt good to have someone to talk to, especially since I was still feeling pretty raw from the breakup. As we kept talking, the conversations got more personal. Sarah started opening up about her own struggles, how she had been through a tough breakup too, how moving to a new city had been hard for her, and how she didn't have many friends in Boston yet. I could relate to a lot of what she was saying, so I found myself being more open with her than I normally would be with someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It felt like we were both in the same boat, both trying to figure out life in this new city, both looking for some kind of connection. Eventually, we started talking almost every day. It became a routine, waking up to messages from her, chatting during my lunch break, and talking late into the night. She'd tell me about her job, her hobbies, the places she liked to visit around the city. I told her about my work, my apartment, the restaurants I like to eat at. The conversations were always light, sometimes flirty, and after a while, I started to feel something more for her. It was weird because we hadn't seen each other in years, and we hadn't even met up in person yet. But the way we talked made it feel like we were becoming more than just old friends reconnecting. One night, after a few weeks of this, she asked me if I wanted to meet up. She suggested we grab coffee or go for a walk around the city, something casual. I was excited about the idea. It felt like the natural next step, finally putting a face to the person I had been talking to so much. I agreed, and we made plans to meet at a coffee shop near Copley Square the following weekend. The day of the meetup came, and I was nervous but excited. I got to the coffee shop a little early and found a table by the window. I texted her to let her know I was there, and she responded saying she was running a few minutes late. I waited, sipping on my coffee, watching people walk by outside. 30 minutes passed, then 45. I texted her again, asking if she was still coming, but she didn't respond. After an hour of waiting, I figured something must have come up, so I left. I wasn't upset, just a little disappointed. I assumed she had gotten caught up with something, or maybe she had changed her mind about meeting up. Later that evening, I got a message from her apologizing profusely. She told me she had been caught in a work emergency and hadn't been able to make it. She seemed genuinely sorry, and since I wasn't the type to hold grudges over something like that, I told her it was no big deal. We made plans to meet up again the following weekend, and I let it go. But the same thing happened again. This time, we were supposed to meet for dinner, and once again, she didn't show up. I waited for over an hour, texting her multiple times, but I didn't get a response until hours later. She apologized again, saying something had come up at the last minute, and she hadn't been able to let me know. I started to feel a little suspicious, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just really busy with work, or maybe she was nervous about meeting in person. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. We kept talking after that, but every time we made plans to meet up, she'd flake at the last minute. Sometimes she'd have a believable excuse, work, family issues, whatever. Other times she'd just go silent and then apologize after the fact. It became a pattern, and after a while I started to feel frustrated. I liked talking to her, but the constant cancellations were starting to get to me. I decided to confront her about it one night, asking why she kept canceling. I told her that if she wasn't interested in meeting up, that was fine, but I didn't want to keep getting my hopes up only to be let down. Her response was strange. She got defensive, saying that she had been going through a lot lately, and that I needed to be more understanding. She accused me of not caring about what she was dealing with, and made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. At that point, I started to feel like something wasn't right. The way she reacted didn't make sense, and I began to wonder if there was more to this than I realized. But I didn't want to lose the connection we had built, so I backed off and tried to be supportive. I told myself that maybe she was just going through a rough time and that I needed to be patient. Then things started to get even weirder. One night, while we were chatting, she mentioned something about my neighborhood, something oddly specific. She talked about a little bakery down the street from my apartment, a place I hadn't mentioned to her before. When I asked her how she knew about it, she said she had walked by it one day while exploring the area. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but then she started bringing up more details about where I lived. She knew the name of the park near my building, the coffee shop I frequented, even the layout of my street. I hadn't told her any of this. I asked her how she knew so much about my neighborhood, and she just brushed it off, saying she had been in the area a few times and had a good memory. But it didn't sit right with me. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. I started to wonder if she had been watching me, following me around without me knowing. It seemed far-fetched, but the details she knew were too specific to be a coincidence. A few days later, I decided to do some digging. I went through her Facebook profile again, looking for any signs that something was off. That's when I noticed something strange. Her profile, which had seemed so real and full of activity, suddenly looked empty. A lot of her old posts were gone, and some of the photos I had seen before had disappeared. Her profile had been wiped clean, almost as if she had deleted everything except for the bare minimum. I tried messaging her to ask about it, but she didn't respond. Her account was still there, but she wasn't replying to any of my messages. I started to get anxious, feeling like I had been duped somehow. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like this whole thing had been a lie, like Sarah wasn't who she said she was. I decided to reach out to one of our mutual friends from high school, someone who had known her back then. I asked if they had talked to Sarah recently, and to my surprise, they told me that they hadn't spoken to her in years. They mentioned that Sarah had moved to a different city a while back and wasn't even on Facebook anymore. I was floored. If the real Sarah wasn't in Boston and wasn't on Facebook, then who had I been talking to all this time? Panic set in as I realized that I had been catfished. Someone had created a fake profile using Sarah's name and photos, pretending to be her to get close to me. I had no idea who this person really was or what their intentions were, but it was clear that they had been manipulating me from the start. I felt sick to my stomach. All those conversations, all those plans to meet up, it had all been a lie. But what scared me the most was the thought that this person knew so much about my life. They knew where I lived, where I liked to hang out, even the people I was close to. I had let them into my life without even realizing it, and now I had no idea what they were capable of. I blocked the fake Sarah's account and reported it to Facebook, but that didn't make me feel any safer. For weeks, I was constantly on edge, wondering if this person was still watching me, still following me around without my knowledge. Every time I saw someone lingering near my apartment or felt like I was being watched, I couldn't shake the fear that it was them. I stopped using Facebook after that, and I've been much more cautious about who I let into my life since then. But even now, I still think about it, about how easily someone was able to manipulate me, about how much information I unknowingly gave away. It's terrifying to realize how vulnerable we are online, how quickly our lives can be invaded by someone we don't even know. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.